Hey, how's it going, everybody? Welcome back to another video. This one is going to be on stimulus checks. So, quick little recap. The last video we did, we were talking about the issue of forcing the vote. And if you guys remember, in that video, there was a section where I went over a PowerPoint. And in that PowerPoint, I take this like pause while I'm talking about it. And that's because I was looking for something and I couldn't find it, but I found it after the fact. There's actually a slide on there that talks about the public option and just like some issues with public option plans. So if you guys want to go look over that, just to get an idea, go for it. I encourage that, since I didn't get to cover it in the video, and it's totally my fault. I just like blanked out, couldn't find it when I was scrolling through. Anyway, so this video we're going to be talking about stimulus checks. I think most people are on the same page about checks being good. The main purpose I want to get to here is I want to accomplish two things. So first, I want to give you guys sources to back up the claims if you ever are in a situation where you have to defend whether or not stimulus is good. And the second thing I want to accomplish is, even if we know that stimulus is good, I feel like for a lot of people it's based on the fact that it just makes sense. Like logically, during a pandemic, giving people money makes sense. But I think some of the stuff that I'm going to read out to you guys here helps create a better picture of how that's actually affecting people's lives. Um, that we just understand the consequences a little more. And I mean, if there's any instance of somebody here who's watching who thinks maybe there's like a better way, or that stimulus checks aren't good or anything like that, I hope that this, gives you some context for why maybe you should reevaluate. Anyway, so we're going to start off here with stimulus checks are good. This is from Claudia Sam, 2019. So this is pre-recession, or pre-COVID. And Sam is an American economist. She was formerly editor of macroeconomics policy at Washington Center for Equitable Growth. I've included like a section here on like just who the authors are. Citations are up here in MLA format and all that. Nice and easy for you guys. Anyway, direct payments are an effective way to stimulate spending. These arguments are supported by a growing body of high-quality research. Automatic stimulus would provide a rapid frontline defense early in a recession. Consumer expenditures slow sharply during recessions. A pullback in spending by consumers can lead to employment losses and reduced production. Consumers are a key focus to stabilize the economy. I think this is important because of the date in 2019, right? We've had literature talking about how stimulus is a really good way to uplift an economy in during times of recession, right? That's the point of what she's talking about here. And I think when we look back in hindsight, the fact that we've had this information available and the fact that it's been such a contentious issue like this year, I think makes us question where have our priorities been if we've been having to tackle such an obvious issue. Um, Another thing you're going to notice is some of this evidence is catered toward in boosting the economy in terms of spending, like consumer spending. So basically, it's a very Keynesian approach of the way you get out of a recession is you get people to just go out and buy stuff, right? Um, the main point of the stimulus checks this year, though, are more so geared towards helping people pay rent, pay for their bills, stuff like that, right? Um, Using the stimulus to buy just goods, getting shopping with that money is almost step two in what we expect people to be able to do with these checks. But this is a very neoliberal approach to economy. The main point that I'm trying to address here is just the effectiveness of stimulus and whether or not they can accomplish the goal that we set out for them to. So moving forward, then we have Ziv in 2020. So this was July 6th. Americans were using their stimulus funds to pay for essentials and to save for an emergency. 30% was paid bills, followed by put in emergency savings and bought essentials, food, hygiene products, etc. Folks are worried and trying to save some stimulus funds. A National Bureau of Economic Research working paper found within 10 days those who had received stimulus payments had spent 600 more, and about half of that spending had happened in the first 3 days after the check's deposit. Those who had less money when the stimulus payments arrived spent more of the funds right away. So there's 2 points that are addressed here. The first is that like a lot of people used their stimulus money for either bills and essentials. But there's also a group of people that put the money into emergency savings. And the reason that they give for why is because they want to have money left over if things get worse, right? So I stress that because there's a difference between people not spending money because they don't need to and people not spending money because they are protecting themselves in the future where they are worried their situation is worse. An example would be someone who's still working, receiving their $1,200 stimulus, but because that they're worried that they might lose their job, um, in the next weeks, in the next months, they save the money so that they can use it later, right? So we have to paint a narrative of how these things happen in the real world, because saying something like, "Oh, X amount of people did nothing with their money," doesn't paint the whole picture. If the reason why people aren't spending money is because they're anticipating having to use it later. I hope that makes sense. And then the second point is here that talks about this National Bureau of Economic Research paper. That's what we're going to talk about here. Like this is from that paper. So checks actually increased spending, Baker and others 2020. There's about like 5 or 6 authors on this paper. I only wrote down Scott Baker and R.A. Farokina. Kinia? I'm sorry, I'm butchering this name. Faroknia. Anyway, um, there's more authors. I only mentioned these two just to give a little bit of like an insight to who the authors are, but you guys can look through all of them. Just use the citation to find the paper. Anyway, one is an associate professor of finance at the Kellogg School of Management. The other is a Columbia Graduate School of Business, a recipient of the Dean's Award, teaching excellence. Their credentials are pretty like impressive. Anyway, households respond with spending increases by 25 cents to 40 cents per dollar of stimulus during the first weeks. Households with lower incomes display stronger responses relative to previous economic stimulus. We see faster effects, larger increases in spending on food and payments like rent, mortgages, and credit cards, reflecting a short term debt overhang. There's a part that I didn't highlight here because the main point is what I showed, but just, like in good faith. It says that we formally show that these differences can make direct payments less effective in stimulating aggregate consumption. All right. The reason it's not highlighted is because the aggregate consumption part isn't super relevant to our discussion. So aggregate consumption of what they're referring to is payments for food, payments on anything but like food, purchasing like goods, consumable goods. So excluding things like rent, mortgage, right? And they make, if you go read the paper, the argument that they make is that like a lot of people use this money towards rent. And their focus is on MPC, which is the marginal propensity to consume. And the reason why they mention that it's less effective in stimulating aggregate consumption is because the way they articulate it, when you pay rent, that money doesn't stimulate the economy because it's going towards like a landlord who is not as likely to do anything with that money. They're more likely to save it, invest it. They're not likely to spend it somewhere else. So their approach is using a outlook of like stimulating the economy, and that's why they say it's less effective. You can go read the paper and you can see all that there. But I just wanted to point out that I'm not ignoring that because it disproves anything else being said here. Just that payments like rent to them in the context of their study made it seem as if like it wasn't accomplishing its goal. Like it is accomplishing its goal. It's just that people have more important things to spend their money on, even if it doesn't stimulate the economy. Um, I hope that makes sense. And then the last thing is living paycheck to paycheck. This is Sarah Hansen, June 2020. So new research. that the first round of checks was likely an economic lifeline. Struggling households needed individuals who received their checks spent a third of them at a rapid pace on essentials like food and rent and saved the rest. Based on a transaction data, these checks are sorely needed to help households stay afloat. And if you, here's another part that I didn't highlight. The author here is R.A. Faroknia. So, right? I used this article specifically because of this reference, right? It's citing back to this paper. So, um, the author of this paper here referencing that based on their data, right, these checks are sorely needed to help households stay afloat. And this is in June, right? Like this is in June. So it's been 6 months since their study talking about how important the checks were to helping people and how effective they were in accomplishing their goal, which was help people pay for rent and help people live. Um, we accomplished both of those things with the stimulus package back in March. And in the context of why this is important now, because we just passed, well, I think the House passed, I'm not sure if the Senate has yet, but the new coronavirus spending bill, which includes a $600 stimulus check. And you guys are going to see a lot of people going online and saying something like hashtag 600 is not enough. I think even I tweeted it out earlier. Um, and it's really not, right? When you have like enough data to support the effectiveness of this type of economic stimulus, versus injecting money into corporations versus injecting money into other areas of the economy, when we know that this works, there's really not an excuse for this to not be a higher sum. There is an argument to be made that like, oh, like this 600 goes to everybody, but there is like unemployment income that's going to people. um but the problem there is that there's a lot of jobs where you can continue to work but still make less money. So for example, like let's take the food industry and restaurants. Um Restaurant servers and bartenders can still have a job. They might still be working. But because of the virus, a lot of people are ordering takeout or just not ordering food at all. And so servers and bartenders have less people inside, which means they get less tips. And even though they're working the same job, they're making less money. And for people like that, the stimulus checks mean a lot because there's a huge difference from making $500 a week, $400 a week, and then suddenly that turns into 300 or $200 a week in an industry where like you're living off of tips. Um, and so that's something important to consider. There's obviously other industries where this situation might apply to, where people might still have a job but just make less money than they used to. Um, and in those industries, I just don't have enough experience to kind of like give you an example. But if you guys either work in those industries or know of like other examples of this where this is like an applicable situation, just like let me know or let everybody else know. But that's really like a lot of what I had to say on the subject. I hope you guys either learned information that you didn't know before, or if you guys were already on this side of like, yes, stimulus is good, we need more stimulus, I hope you can reference these sources in your own discourse, in your own dialogue, whenever you're talking to people. Have some sort of like way to articulate things with actual support. I feel like you can definitely say like, oh, people were using their stimulus money, but it's a little more comforting to be able to say, there's the study, go read it yourself, look at what happened, look at how the money was used, look how fast people use their money, and then you can feel confident that at least, you're not just making an argument on sentiment or just, your goodwill, but there's actual like data to prove it. And like I said, like a lot of these authors are neoliberals and they're using it in terms of like stimulating economic like energy and giving and revitalizing the economy. It's definitely not always in the point of view of just like keeping people alive, but that's the lens that we're approaching it from. So we kind of see that anyway through the data. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you all enjoyed. I hope you all learned something. I hope this was presented um, in a good way. I know that sometimes I went and maybe like lost somebody and like lost my train of thought. So if that happens, if it seems like sometimes I ramble and you get lost on where the conversation is, let me know so that I can do a better job of just like posting what I'm talking about at any given point in time. Because if you guys kind of get lost with where I am, it makes it harder for me to um, go through all the information in a meaningful way. Thanks again, and I hope you all have a great night.